On today's show, I'll start out with the most important segment I've ever done. And I'm actually not being sarcastic, but I prefer it when I am. In it, I will tell you the source of every foreign policy decision the United States ever makes. And no, it's not hatred of James Corden, but that's a close second. We will also get into the National Institute of Health's disgusting history of opposing genocide. They need to be stopped, and President Trump is the man to do it. Plus, a very special guest will join the show from his basement, which is where his dirtiest reporting happens. All that and more is coming up right now. Welcome to Unredacted Tonight. I'm Lee Camp. I'm about to show you how every seemingly unhinged U.S. foreign policy decision works. And it's nothing you'll ever hear on your mainstream media. They'll talk about this as much as they talk about the torture farming that goes into your hamburgers, because hamburger ads keep the lights on at the news studio. That and erectile dysfunction. And I don't mean ads for erectile dysfunction. Once you know why the U.S. acts the way it does, you'll be able to predict future U.S. decisions. But you might not want to, because gross. It's like predicting what's going to happen next in Shaquille O'Neal's career. A commercial for a gadget that sucks gunk out from the wheel well of your car. You were the goat. Anyway, here we go. Almost all U.S. foreign policy decisions come down to hot, sexy currency. In 1944, just after World War II, the Bretton Woods system established the U.S. dollar as the world's anchor currency, pegged to gold, which cemented U.S. economic dominance. This made the U.S. the world's reserve currency. It made U.S. dollars incredibly sought after. However, the U.S. left the gold standard in 1971 under Tricky Dicky Nixon, which meant U.S. dollars weren't pinned to really anything, and that made them unstable. So how would the U.S. maintain its global dominance on currency? Well, Henry Kissinger, the king of darkness and the darkness behind kings, had an idea. What if U.S. dollars were pinned to the sale of the most important commodity on earth, skims? Wait, no, oil. Sorry, thought it was skims. In 1974, Washington and Saudi Arabia struck a pivotal deal, kept secret until 2016, that ensured Saudi oil would be priced exclusively in dollars. In return, the U.S. would give Saudi Arabia limitless military protection and arms deals, and Saudi leaders would pump their oil money back into the U.S. Treasury bonds. It was a you scratch our back, we'll help you destroy the world deal. And it was a bromance built in heaven, which explains why every U.S. president gives the Saudi royalty the old French palm tickler. This is what true love looks like, kids. Find someone who holds hands with you the way a U.S. president holds hands with a Saudi prince. Of course, Joe Biden was dirtier than the others. He stepped it up to fisting. This world-changing deal became known as the Petrodollar, and it was widely understood globally, even though it wasn't admitted in mainstream media until 2016. After the Petrodollar deal began in the 1970s, most of the largest oil producers also switched to U.S. dollars, bolstering its reserve currency status and enabling the U.S. to maintain economic and military preeminence. Most importantly, it meant the U.S. can print all the money at once. It's a pants down gout festival of greed. Other countries can't do that. If they did, their money would become worth less than Alex Jones's line of children's bedtime linens. Something about pillowcases that say, "They're turning the frogs gay," in all caps, just does not help with sleepy time. The U.S. has used this exorbitant petrodollar privilege to, of course, give every hungry person around the world plenty of food and make sure that there are no children suffering anywhere. Of course they didn't do that, because we're ruled by idiopaths, idiot sociopaths, which is why we need a sociopath test at the front door of the White House. In fact, put it at all the doors so they can't get around it. The U.S. ruling elite have actually used their money machine to spend $1 trillion a year on death and destruction. The petrodollar system has directly enabled U.S. imperial reach and the expansion of its military-industrial complex. Foreign governments must hold U.S. dollars, and therefore they essentially all help fund U.S. war-making insanity. Isn't that kind of sweet? Most of the world comes together to fund the destruction of most of the world. So, in order to see how influential the petrodollar is, just ask yourself why any U.S. foreign policy decisions were made. For example, why does the U.S. have an obsession, a particularly strong hatred for certain countries, invading them, cooing them, sending CNN's Clarissa Ward there? No one wants that. It's because those countries are the ones that threaten the petrodollar. The top threats to the petrodollar are nations that have a lot of oil and want to sell it outside of the U.S. dollar. So which countries would those be? The biggest ones used to be Iraq, Syria, Libya, Iran, Venezuela, and Russia. Does it sound like the U.S. has traditionally had, I don't know, any problems with those countries? Have we invaded, bombed, and attacked those countries? Iraq's Saddam Hussein switched to selling oil in euros in 2000, and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency that would replace U.S. dollars. And Syria picked euros over dollars in 2006. Venezuela stopped accepting dollars for oil payments in 2017, but they've been despised by the U.S. long before that for nationalizing their oil and also for being socialist. Who the hell are they to have free health care? We'll tell you if you get health care. And before you ask, the answer is no. So let's see. Of those countries, Saddam Hussein had his head separated from his shoulders after a U.S. invasion. We didn't even ask him if he wanted to. Muammar Gaddafi was bayoneted in the streets after a U.S. NATO invasion, also non-consensual. Assad fled to Russia before he would have been executed after the U.S.-backed war. Venezuela, there have been multiple CIA-connected assassination attempts on Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. And of course, the U.S. elite have had a wild hair up their ass about Iran for years. And last year, the helicopter of Iranian President Raisi went into the side of a mountain. Unrelated, though. Just totally unrelated to anything we're talking about here. You see, what had happened was it was a see-through glass mountain. You know how sometimes people will walk into glass doors like because they didn't see it was like that. And what the U.S. can't achieve via assassination, they do via sanctions. U.S. sanctions have successfully stopped Venezuela and Iran from having anywhere near the impact on the world oil markets. Plus, it means Taylor Swift can never perform there. This is what they mean when they say these countries have been cut off from the SWIFT system. What's that? The banking system? What? You sure? Then what's it have to do with Taylor Swift? Oh, nothing. It just had nothing to do with Taylor Swift. Whatever. So what about Israel? Why does the U.S. send them hundreds of billions of dollars and weapons to perpetrate their genocide in Gaza? Well, Israel is a nuclear-armed, unsinkable U.S. battleship in the center of the Middle East, the center of it all. Another term the American ruling elite use often is force multiplier. The petrodollar acts as a force multiplier for U.S. imperial strategy. It finances a global network of hundreds of overseas bases and proxy engagements, and it gives Washington a powerful economic weapon to reward allies and punish adversaries. Before the petrodollar, the U.S. just had to punish adversaries with, it was mainly revenge porn, but this was prior to the internet, so they just had to hand out revenge porn postcards, and it's not as good. Although that was how they brought down Stalin. So what about the rest of the global South? Well, they're kept under control mainly by debt. They're pressured by the U.S., the World Bank, and the IMF to extract their resources and sell them to Western countries to gain enough foreign currency, petrodollars, to pay the interest on their debts. Between 1990 and 2015 alone, this has resulted in a wealth drain from the global South totaling $242 trillion, equivalent to a quarter of the northern GDP. $242 trillion. There's a giant sucking sound, folks, and it's going from the global South's wealth straight into the gullet of the United States. While a lot of what I've covered you'll hear occasionally on independent media, here's an aspect you'll almost never hear: the connection between the petrodollar and runaway climate change. Let me be clear. As long as the petrodollar system continues, humans will do less to deal with climate crisis than Super 8 does about bed bugs. That's not fair, actually. I was at a Super 8 in Poughkeepsie once, and they did ask the bed bugs to keep the noise down after 11 p.m. That was nice of them. The petrodollar arrangement implicitly incentivizes high oil consumption. Oil exporting nations earn dollars and invest in growth, while oil importing countries need growth to afford expanding energy imports. As of 2022, about 80% of global primary energy still comes from fossil fuels. Any movement away from fossil fuels harms the power of the petrodollar and thereby the power of the U.S. empire. This means we currently live under a system that incentivizes our own extinction, which, if you're wondering, is a bad thing. Bad. But more importantly, why am I the only one talking about it? Well, me and Barcelona-based economics professor Derek Hogley. I just wanted to be a comedian. I just wanted to make fart noises and get people to chuckle, and then say the word pussy and they chuckle a little more. That's all I wanted. Instead, I'm the only one talking about the connection between the petrodollar climate crisis and the U.S. empire. Can't a kid dream anymore? Can't a kid just have a farty dream? Next up, what's the connection between the petrodollar system and the need for endless growth? The economy must expand, whether society wishes it to or not, just to service the debt overhead. In other words, continual GDP growth is structurally required to sustain the monetary system. Technically, that's not just the petrodollar. Even if we had like a strawberry daiquiri-based dollar system, although the world would be a lot better, it would still need endless growth to service the debt. Of course, endless growth ultimately kills the host. Unfortunately, the host in this scenario is planet Earth. Our monetary system is cancer, and the planet is the patient. And Donald Trump is the patient's anal leakage? I think that adds up. But why can't we just have degrowth? Well, under the current system, if we don't keep the global economy growing by at least 3% per year, it plunges into crisis. This means we have to double the economy's size roughly every 20 years. But this exponential growth mandate collides with the reality of a finite planet. Collides with reality is a nice way of saying that in 10 more years, we're going to have to learn to drink fire from a bottle because that will be the only remaining resource. It's possible they might be able to put it into some sort of fire jello shot form, but I wouldn't hold your breath if I were you. Actually, I would totally hold your breath because there's not going to be oxygen either. The result is a vicious cycle. Debt drives growth, growth drives fossil fuel combustion, and fossil fuels exacerbate climate change and ecological harm. So, the largest band of bloodthirsty lunatics need this death cycle to keep going so they can stay as rich and powerful. And when was the last time you saw them do anything that makes them less rich and powerful? I'll tell you, it was the 1971 Jerry Lewis telethon. It's a great show, it really was. But that's over 50 years ago. So it's a long time. So what about China? Why does the U.S. hate them so much? Well, China has the only economy large enough to compete with U.S. petrodollars. On top of that, China is the biggest and most powerful member of BRICS, the anti-U.S. dollar alliance of several nations around the globe. BRICS now has a larger share of the world GDP than the G7 does, making it a huge threat to the petrodollar. And here's the good news. The days of the petrodollar are numbered. U.S. sanctions have spurred talk of de-dollarization. At the same time, the imperative of climate action is pushing the world toward renewable energy, which in the long run will weaken the oil-dollar nexus. Days are numbered. This is my death of petrodollar dance. I'm thinking of adding tambourines. To sum it up, the petrodollar deal has been the linchpin of an entire world system of U.S. hegemony, elite enrichment, and fossil-fueled growth that turbocharged the great acceleration that has pushed the global economy far outside what our planet can sustainably support. And sure, the collapse of the petrodollar will harm the net worth of anybody living or invested in the U.S. empire. But long term, it will give humanity a chance to survive, which, if you're wondering, is a good thing. Very good. We would do well to remember the saying, a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they shall never sit. We need to shred the petrodollar for future generations to thrive. I can't remember who said that quote about the tree. I think it was Dennis Rodman. Could be Peter Dinklage, but probably Dennis Rodman. And now for our segment, Front Row at the Clown Show. I don't know about you, but when I think about medical researchers, the people working on curing cancer or helping the blind to see and the deaf to hear and the annoying to be less like that, when I think of those people, I only want them to do their work if they support genocide. That's the only way. I think they're worthy of working on medical research. You're with me on that, right? Luckily, the Trump administration's National Institute of Health has put out new guidelines, making sure that only researchers who support bombing children will get government grants to do medical research. Genius idea. The guidelines say recipients of NIH grants promise they will not, during the term of this award, engage in a discriminatory prohibited boycott, which is defined as refusing to deal, cutting commercial relations, or otherwise limiting commercial relations, specifically with Israeli companies or with companies doing business with Israel. What a relief! I cannot tell you how many times I've heard a friend was about to start chemo and I was like, wait, whoa. Do you know if the chemo supports Israel? And my friend was like, I don't know. And I'm like, dude, I know you're dealing with this whole cancer thing or whatever you got going on in your life, but it's best to just avoid taking it if you can't know where it stands on Israel's wonderful and justice-based ethnic cleansing in Gaza. This is such a great idea. Thank you, Donald Trump. Such a great idea to cut off all funding to any medical research that might slightly decrease their business relations with Israel. And you'll notice the policy does not say anything about any other countries or states. You could literally be a medical researcher who has cut all ties with Africa, the entire continent, because you're a member of a white supremacist bowling league and you're afraid of what they would think. And that's fine. You could cut ties with Britain because you don't like spotted dick. You had it once in college when you were drunk and you didn't care for it. And that's fine too. You could have an ongoing boycott against Walmart because you think it's too proudly American. And that's fine. But Israel, no, that is not allowed. Thank goodness. Also, in order to get a medical research grant, you have to ensure you will not operate or advance or promote DEI, DEIA, discriminatory equity ideology. And if you're wondering what DEIA is, that's diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Again, what a relief. I was so worried that those doing research on how to decrease the impact of, Alzheimer's might have a ramp going up to their building. I mean, just allowing people in wheelchairs to get in, and can you imagine just rolling up and down the halls all willy-nilly, or should I say wheelie-neely? And I'm not, and look, I'm not saying they can't come in the building. They can be there just like everyone else, but they should have to crawl up those stairs to prove they're worthy. Ramps are the devil's work. Now it's time for Based in the Basement. We may not realize it yet, but algorithms and AI are beginning to control important aspects of our lives. For example, a new law pushed by Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry cedes much of the power of the parole board to an algorithm that prevents thousands of prisoners from early release. The risk assessment tool, Tiger, does not take into account efforts prisoners make to rehabilitate themselves. Instead, it focuses on factors that cannot be changed. It's literally a pre-crime algorithm, and you can't question it. For more on this, let's bring in our Based in the Basement correspondent, John F. O'Donnell. John, hello.
Hello, Lee. How are you, buddy?
Hold on, John. I gotta put in this earbud. I like to do these interviews with this earbud, so if I don't want to hear you anymore, I can just take it out.
Fair enough. And we will get into the Tiger algorithm, but first, I have an issue with you.
Really?
Yeah, I have a bone to pick. Okay. You like to claim that you're the most censored comedian in America, right? Well, yeah. Guess what? I live alone in a basement in Queens where I perform my stand-up comedy routine to myself in the mirror. I'm the most censored comedian in America, dude.
That's not censored. That's a choice.
It's not a choice. That's a choice. That's a choice, really.
Yeah.
In Trump's America. With MAGA fascism, you think they're going to let somebody like me get a lot of exposure? Come on.
Okay. Anyway, you've been researching this horrifying new algorithm. What can you tell us about it?
Okay. Well, basically, I mean, you say horrifying. I say awesome. I mean, fair enough. It only takes into account things that are immutable or unchangeable from a prisoner's past, like when they were first arrested, what their work history is, if they've had prior drug convictions. It doesn't take into account anything a prisoner does to be rehabilitated, which sounds bad, but it's called Tiger, dude. The Tiger algorithm. How cool is that? Tiger. Rawr! We like that, don't we?
So your love of this dystopian algorithm is cool name.
Cool name is part of it. Also, little known fact, Tiger's urine smells like buttered popcorn. That's a true fact. You can look that up.
So I assume based on name, you still, you love Yeezy, huh?
Yeah, why not? Okay, here's the thing about this algorithm. It's basically if a prisoner gets labeled by the algorithm as having a moderate or high risk of recidivism, then it's not even the person is not even eligible to go in front of the parole board. It just streamlines things, Lee. I mean, we should be using algorithms for all sorts of things. Wouldn't it be nice if we could use algorithms instead of having to set up our relationships for us, instead of having to go out and deal with all of these kind of dating apps and stuff like that? If an algorithm could just set it up for us, wouldn't that be so nice?
So you want AI to decide more than just who gets locked up in prison, but also who you're dating, who you marry, maybe who your kids are?
It would be wonderful. I wouldn't have to deal with all these catfish situations anymore.
Had a lot of catfish problems?
Well, I'm initiating all of the catfishing, but I don't feel good about myself after I do it.
All right. So you wouldn't have any more guilt from your catfishing?
Yeah.
It doesn't bother you at all that someone could be in prison for years, working every day to make sure they become a better human being, that they're the ones in prison that are always, doing the right thing and caring for fellow people and humans, and then none of that matters?
Lee, the thing is about the Tiger algorithm, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it cares about us, it wants to make sure that we stay safe by being tough on crime. And the truth is, algorithms are wonderful things. We should embrace them. We should love them, and we should make sure.
Don't you want something that's accountable? Like you could go there and be like, "Hey, you got it wrong. This guy deserves to get out of prison," or "You set me up with this woman and she's a nightmare," or "I'm a nightmare. Why'd you set me up with this nice woman?" Like someone is accountable.
Yeah, but you think you can be more accountable than artificial intelligence? Lee, it's so much smarter than us. It's so much better. It determines, who goes viral on social media sites, perhaps like Instagram or TikTok, hey, algorithm, I'm looking at you, baby.
So that algorithm you just praised is why this video is not going to be seen by anybody.
Well, I'm hoping maybe that me and Tiger can have a good relationship. I can upgrade from being the most censored comedian in America to, going viral a little bit.
I mean, I've heard you've had some viral issues, but those were something else.
That's a totally different situation, and I don't want to get into it. I told you we weren't going to discuss that type of virality here tonight. The reality is this. I'm one of the great comedic minds of the 21st century, and I'm stuck here in the basement because the algorithm is yet to shine favorably upon me. It's ridiculous.
If only there were an algorithm that could stem ego a little bit.
That would be nice.
Thanks so much, John. Where can people follow your other work?
Okay, you can follow me at JFODLovesYou on socials. Do it, for God's sakes. And if there's one thing you could do, Redactivist, type my name into YouTube, John F. O'Donnell, and watch my stand-up special, The Manic Depressive Chocolate Fountain Operator. Like, share, leave a comment. Thank you guys so much.
The algorithms are going to start operating the chocolate fountains, then you'll be out of a job.
I know.
Thanks, John. And now, here are your headlines from the future. Coming up in 1 week, we'll learn President offers nation free dental if they let him keep supporting genocide. And in just 2 weeks, we'll read, Vatican not sure why Pope left instructions to have ashes scattered at Button Honey Strip Club in Long Island. What a man. 2 days from now, you'll read, in latest election, Canadians proudly state they would one day like to be their own country. Good for them. And coming up in September, we'll find out President Trump announces starting in 2026, Americans can pay their taxes in guns. Oh, he's the best. That's the show. But before you run off, I'm giving away more free stuff than ever if you become a member for $6 at leecamp.net or patreon.com/leecamp. You'll get both my ebooks. You'll get all 3 of my Zoom comedy specials that are not available anywhere else. And you'll get exclusive segments regularly. Join up and help keep this show going. Until next time, remember, the revolution will have laughter. Keep fighting.